Hey folks, welcome to another Passion for Sound audio review, and today a look at the EarMen Sparrow DAC. Recently I reviewed the EarMen Eagle, was really impressed with it, and decided that I thought it was better than the Dragonfly Red. So the next step up the chain in the Sparrow here is obviously a competitor to the Dragonfly Cobalt. So the question now is, does this knock off the Dragonfly Cobalt and therefore make EarMen the holders, in my opinion at least, of the best dongle style DACs available on the market? I do know there are other brands out there like Tempotech, which I've reviewed here. There's the EcoZerta some people have spoken about. So I know there's some others out there, but for me, of everything I've heard so far, the Dragonflies have easily been the best performers. So I'm really interested to see if the Sparrow can dethrone the Cobalt in the same way the Eagle dethroned the Red. My name's Lachlan. Let's jump into the review and find out. Similar to the EarMen Eagle, the EarMen Sparrow is built on a Sabre DAC chip. In the case of the Sparrow though, it's using the 9281 Pro versus the regular 9281 in the Eagle. As a result of using the Pro chip, the Sparrow does have slightly higher specifications, and it also packs a balanced output in addition to the 3.5mm single-ended, but beyond that, it's very similar to the Eagle. And what I mean by that is it handles PCM all the way up into high sample rate, 384 kHz for example, DXD. It also does DSD and also MQA decoding. As I spoke about in the Eagle review, it's technically not meant to do MQA, the Eagle, but it does appear to based on what the indicator light shows when listening to MQA audio. The Sparrow, on the other hand, officially does MQA. So that means the Sparrow will handle every single format under the sun. MP3, FLAC, Apple audio codecs, MQA, DSD, DXD, you name it, the Sparrow can do it. I probably should mention at this point that the Sparrow retails for $199 US, or here in Australia, about 400 Australian dollars. So it's cheaper than the AudioQuest Dragonfly Cobalt, but more expensive than the Dragonfly Red. With that in mind, during this review, I've put it up against the Dragonfly Cobalt and even the Chord Mojo to try to get a sense of exactly where it sits in its overall performance. Before we talk about sound quality and how it compares to those other DACs, let's talk about what you get for your money. Inside the box with the Sparrow is just the DAC itself. It's this tiny little dongle here. It's got this glass shiny black finish. It's a bit of a fingerprint magnet, but it looks fantastic. It's got a little indicator light where the EarMen logo is. I'll talk more about that shortly. On one end it's got USB-C input. On the other end it's got 3.5 and 2.5mm outputs. In other words, single-ended 3.5 and balanced 2.5. In the box you also get a USB-A to USB-C cable, so that's going to work for computers and the like, and then you've got your USB-C to USB-C cable for use with Android phones. Because I'm not an Apple user, I can't comment directly on connection to Apple phones, but I believe if you use the camera adapter with any Apple devices, you can then plug the EarMen in directly. While I'm talking about inclusions and general bits and pieces about the design of the Sparrow, I want to cover off a couple of concerns. The first one is that there's no case provided for the Sparrow, and I think for a product like this, it's fairly small. It is likely going to be prone to scratches when thrown in a bag or a pocket, and so it would have been nice to have a small pouch of some sort provided, similar to the little leather pouch provided with the Dragonfly series from AudioQuest. In addition to that, the other things I want to mention are that the indicator light on the front of the Sparrow, when I'm using it with MQA, tends to flash, so it goes from purple, which is saying it's receiving the MQA signal, and it flashes back and forth to different colours. I don't know if that's a fault, I don't know if that's a deliberate feature of some sort to tell me what the PCM sample rate is of the MQA. So in other words, if it's a 44.1 kilohertz MQA file versus a 96 kilohertz MQA file, I'm not sure if there's something going on there, but I find it quite off-putting because it makes me think maybe the connection's not secure and maybe there's an issue with the signal coming through. Speaking of the signal coming through, the other issue I have with this, and it may also relate to that flashing indicator light, is that there's major EMI or RF noise picked up. What I mean by that is that when you use the Sparrow with your phone, particularly on balanced, I didn't hear it so much on single-ended, but on the balanced output, using a phone with the Sparrow or even having the phone near to the Sparrow, you can hear noise coming through from the Wi-Fi or the cellular circuit. It comes through as very faint clicks and sort of strange little beeping noises, like long extended beeping and clicky noises. It's not major, but it is enough to distract, and therefore it's going to be enough to detract from the listening experience. That to me is a big flaw with a product like this, and even though you can generally not hear it during music playback, it's enough to put me off. Now, the reason I've raised that here when I'm talking about the accessories is that according to the supplier of EarMen here in Australia, EarMen are already aware of this problem. It's to do with the cables, and what they recommend is keeping the Sparrow as far from your phone as possible when using it. That's not really ideal if you're out and about walking around, but if you're at a desktop situation, putting the EarMen Sparrow further away, which requires using an aftermarket cable. In addition to that, they are, I believe, working on a cable which has better shielding and should therefore prevent the issue. I also believe that when that cable is available, it will be provided to existing Sparrow owners at no charge. So that's great if EarMen can actually turn around and fix this problem using a cable alone, but it's concerning to me that the problem's there in the first place, given that other comparable devices like the Dragonfly Red and the Dragonfly Cobalt don't have that issue at all. Even the really cheap Tempur-Tech Sonata HD Pro that I recently reviewed doesn't have EMI issues. So it is a big drawback for me, and it does make me question the overall quality of the design of the Sparrow, rightly or wrongly. So with all that out of the way, and don't make up your mind just yet because you need to hear me talk about the sound quality of this before you make your final decision on purchasing if you're in the market for a Sparrow. So before we get into that sound quality, the last things I want to talk about are power outputs. Despite its tiny size, the Sparrow here can output up to 4 volts using the balanced output into 600 ohm loads. That means it should have plenty of power for high impedance headphones such as your Sennheiser range, the ZMF headphones. Anything that needs a high voltage output should be fine with the EarMen Sparrow. In single-ended mode, it still gives 2 volts, which is a pretty good output overall. It's no better than something like a Cobalt in single-ended, but having that balanced output means you should be able to get most headphones working beautifully. I should mention that the single-ended output does drop down to only 1.4 volts when using lower impedance headphones, but that shouldn't really matter because lower impedance requires higher current, not higher voltage. And speaking of current, one thing you won't find published on the EarMen site, and therefore any of the retailers that I've looked at, is the actual power output figures. Now I'm assuming that's because it depends on what the Sparrow is connected to as to how much current it can draw, and therefore what the total power output is. If you're connecting it up to a computer, you should in theory get 500 milliamps available, or close to that. If you're connecting it up to a smartphone though, the power output may be limited by what the smartphone will allow the Sparrow to draw. And so with that in mind, do be aware that the Sparrow is probably not an ideal solution for low impedance, difficult to drive planar magnetics. It should be fine with moderately difficult planar magnetics like say a HiFiMan Sundara, but you certainly wouldn't expect it to drive a very difficult low impedance planar because it's going to struggle with current draw, and that's not so much a reflection of the device so much as a reflection of the power supply available to it from either your computer or your phone. What I can confirm is that it beautifully drove everything I tried with it, from IEMs all the way through to something like the 300 ohm ZMF Atticus that I currently have on loan from patron Paul. And thanks Paul for sending that through. Those of you interested in the review, it's coming up in the near future, so make sure you subscribe if you're interested in the ZMF Atticus review. For now though, let's start talking a bit more about using the Sparrow as a device with a smartphone and also with a computer. My experiences in both cases was pretty similar, with the one difference being the EMI noise that I've already talked about that you pick up when using it with the phone. Other than that, sound quality from PC or Android are basically identical, keeping in mind that when using it with Android, you will need an app like USB Audio Player Pro in order to bypass the Android operating system's audio functions and send a direct pure feed of the data through to the Sparrow. Once you've got your app in order, it should sound identical whether you're using a smartphone or a computer of some sort. Speaking of connectivity, there are a couple of little things I should point out before I continue with the general sound quality. And that is that I found some slight connectivity issues both with PC and with Android. What I was finding was that at times I'd lose connectivity to the device. I can't work out exactly why, but what was happening with Android using USB Audio Player Pro was that if I lost connectivity to the device and then I tried to reconnect it and play back, the app on the phone would act like it was playing sound, but I'd get no sound out of the actual DAC. I'd have to shut down USB Audio Player Pro, open it up again, and restart the initialization of the DAC, and then play back before I could get sound. Now that might be an issue with the app, so I don't want to suggest that the device, the Sparrow, is the issue here, but I do want to raise that I found some issues there. If you hit those same issues, all you need to do is quit all the way out of the app and start the app again. In the case of PC, I had some similar minor connectivity issues, but they weren't as pronounced as on the Android. What I did conclude though was that for some reason the Sparrow seemed just a little bit less stable with its connection to the computer compared to something like the Dragonfly Cobalt. The Dragonfly Cobalt in all of my testing never missed a beat, but occasionally I found the Sparrow would drop off the system. I was using Roon, so it would drop off the Roon system and then reappear. I'm not sure why. I was using a remote system, so I had my laptop working as a Roon endpoint when driving the Sparrow, so again it's possible that it was a software issue communicating from my Roon core here in my office out to the living room where I had my laptop. I just want to raise these things though, because the Dragonfly Cobalt never missed a beat, whereas the Sparrow just had a few hiccups along the way. With all that in mind, it's really important then to know that the Sparrow sounds fantastic. So it's going to be a matter of weighing up whether some of these minor niggles and potential issues are worth it for you for what I'm about to describe about the sound. First and foremost, let me start by talking about single-ended versus balanced. Like a number of products I've reviewed recently, the single-ended output sounds to me like a bit of an afterthought. Maybe not an afterthought, clearly the designers knew they were going to put it in there, but my issue with it is it just doesn't match up to the quality of the balanced in any way, shape or form. And in particular, when I compare the EarMen Eagle's single-ended output with the single-ended output from the Sparrow, the Eagle was comfortably better. It's like the Eagle was designed with single-ended in mind because it's a purely single-ended device and therefore has maximized the quality of that single-ended output, whereas with the Sparrow, it's like it was designed with balanced in mind as the sole output and then the single-ended was thrown in for convenience. That seems to be a common trend at the moment. I've had similar conversations with you about the Schiit Magnus and also about the recently reviewed Monolith Liquid Platinum amplifier. In both of those cases as well, the balance sounds fantastic, the single-ended is just okay. And once again with the Sparrow, the single-ended is just okay. It's not great, as I'll talk about shortly, it's nowhere near the Eagle or the Dragonfly Cobalt in performance, but thankfully the balanced output more than makes up for it. To wrap up my talk of the single-ended output and then really discuss it again, it's thick and it's a bit lacking in detail and space compared to the balanced output, which is open and spacious and detailed. So I'm not going to talk much more about single-ended from this. Know that the single-ended is there, but it's not great. The balanced output, on the other hand, is wonderful. It's got an open, spacious and detailed sound. It's got great articulation of all the sounds, good layering in the soundstage, and overall comes across as a really well-refined and well-tuned DAC and amplifier. It does occasionally come across as just a tiny bit edgy, but for the most part I've described the sound in my notes from the Sparrow as being authoritative and clean. It's just a really nice sounding DAC. And as I said before, that's regardless of whether you're feeding it into low impedance IEMs or all the way up to something like a 300 ohm ZMF Atticus. In all cases, that sound is authoritative, clean, crisp and spacious. So let's put that into context with a couple of comparisons. The Dragonfly Cobalt costs about $100 more than the EarMen Sparrow, so it's a significant difference in investment, and yet to me, the Sparrow just wipes the floor with the Cobalt as long as you're using balanced. When running single-ended, it's a very different story. The Cobalt's comfortably better. But if you've got balanced headphones or earphones, the Sparrow is definitely the superior device despite costing $100 less. What I found when listening to the Sparrow in balanced output versus the Cobalt single-ended was that the Sparrow just has a greater sense of space, a greater sense of detail, it sounds more refined, everything about it is just better. Of particular note was that I was hearing more texture in the sound. Things weren't harsh, things weren't overly bright or pushed in your face, but there was a greater sense of texture throughout the sound signature. Listening to Leviathan by Nick Cave and the Bad Seeds, what I heard was a much more expansive soundstage from the Sparrow compared to the Cobalt, which sounded comparatively cramped. Now the Cobalt for me has previously been kind of a poster child for having an expansive sound from a dongle style DAC. So for the Sparrow to so comfortably beat it goes to show just how well it performs. But do keep in mind, you have to be using the balanced output to get this level of performance. What I found overall was that if I was going to be switching back and forth between balanced and single-ended headphones and earphones, I probably would still choose the Cobalt because the performance single-ended is so much better than the Sparrow's single-ended performance, and whilst the Sparrow is clearly better when using it balanced, I think I'd choose the middle ground of the Cobalt over the Sparrow if using both. If just using balanced, it's an easy decision and I'd just go for the Sparrow. So having done that comparison and hearing how spacious the presentation from the Sparrow was, I was really keen to put it up next to the Cord Mojo. The Cord Mojo costs about $400 more than the Sparrow, so it's getting up towards 3 times the price. It's also not a dongle style device, it's large and it's clunky in comparison to the Sparrow, so in many ways there's no comparison. But the reason I wanted to try them side by side was the sense of space and detail from the Sparrow had me questioning just how good it was up against something like the Mojo, which is quite a reference point for portable amplifiers and DACs. What I heard when listening to the two side by side is that as good as the Sparrow is, it's not quite as good as the Mojo. And that's fair enough because the Mojo's got an internal battery, which means that it's going to have cleaner and more power available for both the DAC and amp circuits. I found that the sound from the Sparrow was more forward, it had a slightly fuller bass response or a little bit more kick from the bass, but I found that it got a little bit edgy at times in comparison to the Mojo. For example, listening to Dr. Dre's 2001 album, the Sparrow got quite fatiguing, whereas the Mojo was still comfortable to listen to. The Mojo also produces a greater sense of space and depth in the soundstage, and that's over and above as good as the Sparrow was when compared to the Cobalt. So what you're hearing here probably is that as you go up in range from something like, say, a Tempur-Tech Sonata HD Pro up to, say, the Dragonfly Red or the EarMen Eagle, and then to the Sparrow and the Mojo, each step of the way you're getting a bit more refinement and a little bit more space in the soundstage. I know from reading forums and hearing comments from viewers that some people don't value soundstage as much as that sense of detail and that little bit of presence that you get from a presentation like the Sparrow, where it's a little bit in your face. So no doubt some people are going to prefer the Sparrow to something like the Mojo, and that's totally fine. For me, I do think the Mojo is still a step ahead of the Sparrow, but the Sparrow comes incredibly close given the $400 price difference. So having spent some time with the Sparrow, using it both with PC and also with Android, I think it's got a lot of potential, and if EarMen can fix the EMI issues with a cable, it's probably my recommendation over and above the Dragonfly Cobalt, but only if you're predominantly or maybe even exclusively using balanced earphones and headphones. The single-ended performance for me is not up to scratch. It should have been better for a product that performs as well as this does with balanced, and to me it almost means that you need the EarMen Eagle for your single-ended and the EarMen Sparrow for your balanced, and that's a real shame. This should, in my opinion, have outperformed the Eagle single-ended and then also provided the balanced performance as well. What I found through my testing though is that I would actually choose the Eagle for single-ended Maybe over and above the Cobalt, they're quite different sounds, but either I would choose the Eagle or the Cobalt for single-ended and keep this only for balanced. So with all that in mind, hopefully this has helped clarify your decisions around which DAC's right for you. If you're running balanced, I absolutely would recommend the Sparrow. Do keep an eye out and an ear out for information and news regarding the replacement cable to get rid of that EMI issue. But beyond that, I do think it's a good product and worth a go. If you are predominantly using single-ended devices, you might be better off going with the EarMen Eagle. It's significantly cheaper and the single-ended performance is better than the Sparrow. It's more open, it's more detailed, and overall a better listen. And finally, I think the Dragonfly Cobalt for me still has a place on the market. It's potentially a little bit better than the EarMen Eagle, although that's going to be a subjective decision, and it's definitely better for single-ended than the EarMen Sparrow. So the fact that it's a true MQA decoder, whereas the Eagle's a bit questionable as to whether it is actually decoding MQA or not, the fact that the Cobalt does that officially and outperforms the Sparrow means to me, if you're an MQA fan using single-ended, you may still choose the Cobalt. So apologies that I can't provide a definitive answer here. The Eagle is amazing, the Sparrow is amazing if you're using balanced, and the Cobalt still has its place. Beyond that, it's going to come down to you thinking about what your needs are, what your preferences, what your tastes, and what your listening habits are. I like to try and provide a bit more guidance where I can in reviews where possible, but on this occasion, it's a very split field, and I actually don't know for myself what I'm going to do. I was contemplating buying the Sparrow at first, but I'm now on the fence about whether it's worth it. So hopefully I provided enough information to help you make your decision, or at least to inform your decision along the way, and I feel your pain of having great devices to choose from, but none of them quite fitting every single need. So good luck in your decisions, thanks for watching, enjoy the music, and I'll see you here next time on Passion for Sound.